On this Thursday night, troubling trend. The increase of infants and children infected with COVID and in the hospital.
It can make parents to be very, very nervous.
Plus, if you can find one, what's the most effective way to use an at-home rapid test? The winter wallop on the West Coast, the mess, the misery, and the mayhem. The American president's stern warning on the anniversary of the Capitol riot.
I will allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of democracy.
The concerns of a Donald Trump comeback. Courting controversy, the world tennis champ not feeling the love from Australia's government. And lifesaver, how a cat named Smuckers got a baby bobcat out of a dangerous jam.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. As the Omicron variant continues to spread rapidly, the impact is being felt more widely. Testing capacity cannot keep up, and we don't have an accurate picture of how many Canadians now have COVID. And though the majority of people do have mild symptoms, the sheer number of cases now means hospitalizations are rising too. Quebec already has a record number of people in hospital with COVID, and the numbers are projected to keep rising at a time when hospitals everywhere are struggling with a lack of staff. Children generally have very mild symptoms, but there are cases of children, including infants, ending up in the hospital and even in ICU. Toronto Public Health confirmed today a child under the age of 4 has died with COVID-19. Our coverage begins with Caryn Lieberman.
We're seeing an uptick in newborns and babies being admitted to the hospital in Ontario.
With the Omicron variant spreading rapidly, the tiniest patients with COVID-19 are being admitted to hospitals across the country.
It can make parents to be very, very nervous. But I think what people need to remember is that if you actually get the vaccine in pregnancy, you can actually help protect your baby in the first few months of life.
An urgent push by pediatric hospitals and physicians for pregnant people to get vaccinated and quickly to help protect infants. At Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, there are currently 16 pediatric patients with COVID-19. In the last few weeks, children's hospitals in Ottawa and Hamilton have admitted a total of 6 babies under 12 months with the virus.
Newborns, generally under the age of 3 months or so, who have been admitted to hospital. And the common theme is that their mothers had not been vaccinated for COVID in pregnancy.
A look at all recent COVID-19 hospitalizations in Ontario by age group shows newborns up to children aged 4, all those who are not yet eligible for the vaccine, have the highest hospitalization rate among youth. Meantime, in the United States, the number of children hospitalized with COVID-19 is soaring.
We are indeed seeing an absolute ton of COVID-19 in children at the current moment.
Just this week, the U.S. documented a record number of pediatric hospital admissions related to the virus.
As many more children will get infected, a certain proportion of them, usually children that have underlying comorbidities, are going to wind up in the hospital.
Doctors say, at least for the youngest patients, consider this.
Vaccination in pregnancy not only will affect the mom, but might also produce antibodies which can then go across and affect the baby.
Protection that could help for up to the first 6 months of life. Caryn Lieberman, Global News, Toronto.
Many Canadians are unable to get tested for COVID. Tests are in such short supply. Ontario's Chief Public Health Officer said today testing is a luxury and said if you have symptoms, you should assume you have COVID because it's so prevalent and you should self-isolate. If you can get your hands on an at-home rapid test, there's a lot of debate right now about whether it's best to swab your nose or your throat. Some experts believe doing both may better detect Omicron. As Jamie Mauracher reports, like everything in this pandemic, advice on rapid tests is evolving.
Stephanie Barry is a busy mother of 4, so when she woke up with a headache and a sore throat, she quickly reached for a rapid test.
So I did it at my nose and it came back negative. So I'm like, okay, no big deal. I went about my day. I got worse as the day progressed.
A search online brought up throat swabbing, a common practice in the UK.
Wipe the soft tip of the swab around the back of the throat.
I did throat, like, the 4 or 5 times on your tongue and then on your cheeks and then up my nose 5 times. And it came back positive like within a minute.
A small preprint study out Wednesday found nasal rapid antigen tests lag when it comes to catching COVID early. Last month, a larger trial out of South Africa called nasal testing suboptimal when it came to the Omicron variant specifically. Epidemiologist Eric Feigl-Ding says this is likely because it replicates much quicker in the upper respiratory tract.
It's a very different virus from Delta. And it seems that you can find it not only more, but also find it about a day earlier if you swab your mouth.
But officials aren't ready to make formal recommendations. The U.S. FDA instead issued a safety warning this week and implored Americans to follow their rapid test kit instructions. Health Canada approves the inserts for at-home rapid tests here. Most advise nasal swabs. And while the Public Health Agency wouldn't say if it would be issuing new guidelines, Toronto ER doctor Kashif Pirzada says the government needs to make adjustments as the virus changes.
It's time to be a bit more proactive. Like every house should have a box of these rapid tests. Your throat, I think, should probably be standard now.
He says swabbing your throat and your nose wouldn't invalidate the results. Just make sure you're doing it correctly.
For any mouth sampling, do not drink or eat about 30 minutes before you do the sample.
Barry is relieved she found she was positive before her husband, a firefighter, went to work and her kids went to daycare.
I'm just I'm worried for how many people have detected in their nose and then have gone and done whatever thinking they're negative.
The last thing any of us want, to unknowingly risk infecting others. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Toronto.
Well, it was predicted and now it's happening. Omicron is putting a strain on healthcare. In Quebec, new modeling suggests within 2 weeks that province could see more than 3,000 people hospitalized and at least 400 in intensive care, both well above record levels. Services are being reduced, but the province says it won't be enough to free up the staff needed to care for the expected influx of COVID patients. About 20,000 healthcare workers are off the job right now in Quebec because of COVID-19. Quebec is bringing in new restrictions that are targeting the unvaccinated. Starting January 18th, proof of vaccination will be required to buy alcohol in liquor stores and marijuana in cannabis stores. The province says more restrictions are on the way. New modelling out of BC makes similar projections. The independent BC COVID-19 modelling group, made up of experts from BC universities and the private sector, projects between 2,000 and 10,000 people could be in the hospital at one time during the peak in late January. The group says there is evidence the variant is less severe and could lead to shorter hospital stays, but with infections doubling every 3.5 days, hospitals could face a surge unlike anything seen to date. More heavy snow has created headaches across British Columbia. People living in parts of that province that wouldn't normally see much snow woke to find it everywhere. Some love it, others loathe it. As Neetu Garcha reports, while it may look like a winter wonderland, it is causing some extremely hazardous conditions.
It's the kind of snowfall some people in Surrey, BC have never seen before.
This year is lots of snow.
The winter wallop leading to weather warnings for nearly all of BC, dumping up to 30 centimeters of snow on some parts of Vancouver Island and up to 20 centimeters on the 2.5 million who live in Metro Vancouver, most of whom just aren't used to this.
It's beautiful unless you have to drive in it. We have to deal with a lot less of it than the rest of Canada, so it could be worse.
Hydro outages plaguing the South Coast, knocking out power to more than 20,000 customers. Travel disruptions on ferries and flights.
We do apologize the inconvenience for the delays.
Temporary transit suspensions too, with this just the latest extreme weather for BC, which continues to step out of the boundaries of what is normal in this province, according to climate change expert John Clegg.
We are experiencing weather that more typically you'd see in southern Ontario and southern Quebec.
Most school districts and university campuses on the South Coast canceled classes Thursday. All right, we decided to get in on the fun of a snow day ourselves. Whew. But these hills and mountains all over BC that are the source of play for so many, of course, also a sign of the difficulty that drivers face in making winter conditions perilous in this province.
We're told not to pull in to stop so they have lots of snow.
A dangerous mix of freezing rain, wind, and cold temperatures challenging snow clearing operations like ice removal from bridges and stretching city snow removal resources thin.
A lot of people out here don't have snow tires, where the rest of the country, they all do.
It took about 20 minutes for this bus to get going again, as already icy conditions from earlier storms have only been made worse, and there's more snow on the way. And people are being told to avoid the roads altogether if they can. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Surrey, BC.
A cold snap is also lingering in other parts of the country, and there are winter storm warnings across the prairies. The entire province of Saskatchewan is under an extreme cold warning tonight. Temperatures are expected to dip between -40 and -50 with the wind chill, and that will extend to most of Alberta and Manitoba, too. South of the border, parts of the U.S. are also grappling with severe winter weather. In Michigan, storm warnings have been extended to Friday as blizzard conditions pound that state, reducing visibility and making driving hazardous. Over 30 centimeters of snow is expected in some areas, and another storm is slamming Kentucky and Tennessee. Heavy snow is snarling traffic there and bringing highways to a standstill. A candlelight vigil at the U.S. Capitol tonight. 1 year since a violent mob stormed inside, encouraged by former President Trump. It was an attack intended to prevent Joe Biden from assuming office. It failed, but the threat to American democracy persists. Today, President Biden condemned those who stormed the Capitol and those who instigated it behind the scenes, vowing to defend American democracy. And he delivered a searing message targeted at Donald Trump and his supporters.
You can't love your country only when you win. You can't obey the law only when it's convenient. You can't be patriotic when you embrace and enable lies.
Our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Proskow covered that day and reports on the message delivered a year later in a country more divided than ever.
I'm praying that we'll never have another day like we had a year ago today.
Inside the very building overtaken by the mob, President Joe Biden offered a sharp rebuke of the lie that incited the attack.
The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest.
Without naming Donald Trump, Biden warned about America's path toward autocracy, that future elections risk being overturned by politicians who ignore the will of voters.
I will stand in this breach. I will defend this nation. And I will allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of democracy.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
When the rioters marched in Trump's name last January, they aimed to overturn Biden's victory. Their targets, the lawmakers who barely escaped, still relive the horror of that day.
A police officer in a big flak jacket and a large rifle grabbed me firmly by the collar like this. I'll never forget that grip. And said to me, "Senator, we got to get out of here. You're in danger."
Yet 1 year later, Americans do not have a shared sense of what happened on January 6th. Trump supporters have tried to downplay the events or laud what they believe was a justified action.
In their memory.
During a moment of silence for the police officers who died during the siege, only 2 Republicans were present, Liz Cheney and her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney.
It matters that you have 2 different realities playing out, both online and offline, that people don't see the same facts the way they are.
Seamus Hughes researches violent extremism in America. He warns the lies and division have made January 6th the rallying cry for future political violence.
If we can't call a spade, that's going to be an issue, not only for now, but in future events.
Jackson, there are people who think Donald Trump could run for president again in 2024. How might the events of 1 year ago factor into that election?
Well, Donna, it's so incredibly polarizing that both parties are seizing upon the events of that day. Democrats say it's a reason to pass voting rights legislation. Republicans say it's a reason why elected officials should have the ability to toss out election results if they suspect fraud. Either way, Republican voters are still firmly on the side of Donald Trump. 60% say he bears little to no responsibility for the violent events of that day. Donna?
All right, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. Some brighter news in Canadian politics. The federal leader of the NDP is a new father. Jagmeet Singh and his wife welcomed their new daughter on Monday, a day after Singh's own birthday. And he tweeted today, "Our powerful little baby girl is basically my birthday present for life." The uprising in Kazakhstan turns deadly. Coming up, the president is pointing the finger at international terrorists. In Kazakhstan, police say they've killed dozens of what they call anti-government rioters in Almaty, the country's most populated city. A state of emergency is in effect. These protests began over rising fuel prices and then escalated. And now troops from Russia have arrived. As Redmond Shannon reports, the Kazakh president claims foreign-trained terrorists are responsible for the unrest.
After days of containing protests and riots, Kazakh security forces hit back with deadly force. Police will only say they killed dozens of people who were trying to storm government buildings in the main city. 18 security force members have also reportedly died. The government says more than 2,000 people have been arrested. This is some of the aftermath of days of violence, sparked initially by rising fuel costs, including a presidential residence and the mayor's office building in Almaty. International armed forces arrived on the ground Thursday at the invitation of Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The troops are from an alliance of former Soviet republics, primarily Russia. What role they will play and how long they will stay is unclear. Tokayev claims the root of the violence also lies outside of Kazakhstan, saying international terrorists have trained protesters.
It's a very much a big concern that people do want banditry to stop.
Asel Tutumlu is a Kazakh political academic. She says many people in the country believe the protest movement has been deliberately sabotaged by organised groups causing violence, hastening a crackdown.
Are they affiliated with the government? Are they mafia people? Are they indeed the foreign troops who are trained and engaged in this type of things, activities? That's not really clear.
Tutumlu says even if protests are quelled for now, they will resume unless there is real political reform. As this protester put it, the coiled spring has been unleashed after 30 years. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Ahead, why two cats now share a special bond. Food prices around the world hit a 10-year high last year, and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, which tracks globally traded food commodities, says there's little relief in sight for 2022. Prices were up more than 28%. The highest spike was maize, up 44%. Food prices eased slightly in December, but that dip followed 4 consecutive months of increasing costs. The food agency says the global pandemic, uncertain climate conditions, and rising prices for producers leave little room for optimism for a more stable market this year. Well, I know cat stories can't wipe away all the bad news, but we need some optimism, right? So here's a little tale about a domestic cat from a shelter who saved a wild bobcat kitten. Smuckers is the cat. His blood turned out to be a match for a bobcat kitten. It was found in a New Brunswick barn, weak, cold, and dehydrated. The transfusion worked. The bobcat is doing better, and Smuckers, who arrived at the Fredericton SPCA days ago, is being called a hero and has already been adopted. 2 happy cats. No entry for Novak Djokovic. Next, the tennis star's match against Australia's vaccine laws. A big tennis star has discovered his fame can't protect him. Novak Djokovic is stuck in a quarantine hotel in Australia, and he could be deported. His hopes of playing in the Australian Open hang in the balance, and there's a big debate about whether it's fair. Eric Sorensen explains.
It's believed the world's top tennis player was brought in this van to this hotel, out of sight and out of the Australian Open. Novak Djokovic had posted heading down under with exemption permission, but from local authorities only. And the Australian government found no proper medical exemption, nor apparently evidence of Djokovic being vaccinated.
If you have a visa and you're double vaccinated, well, you're very, very welcome to come. But if you're not double vaccinated and you're not an Australian resident or citizen, well, you can't come.
Djokovic, who all but owns the Australian Open trophy, now awaits a court to decide whether to let him stay and compete or be deported. In Djokovic's native Serbia, it's verging on a diplomatic incident. The president has decried Australia's decision, and Djokovic's father declared Serbia's salvation at stake. His fans call it discrimination.
Just because he chooses not to state, his vax status, it is a personal choice.
But others in the tennis community say Djokovic made his choice and could not finesse his way into a country that has imposed tough rules to combat COVID.
I feel sorry for him, but at the same time, he knew the conditions since a lot of months ago, so he makes his own decision.
This tournament was an opportunity for Djokovic to be acclaimed the greatest of all time by one important metric: Grand Slam titles. Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, and Roger Federer have each won 20, a remarkable moment in tennis history. And Djokovic could break the deadlock, winning the Open he has swept a record 9 times. But, like basketball's Kyrie Irving and football's Aaron Rodgers, Djokovic has now attracted followers among the unvaccinated, and sidestepping the rules could risk the integrity of both the sport and Australia's laws.
The message that's being sent is a strong one here. First of all, athletes are not the exception, allowed to be treated differently from the rest of society when it comes to a pandemic or health risk.
Djokovic's potential absence leaves an opening for Denis Shapovalov and Felix Auger-Aliassime, Canadians who just pulled off major victories in a team event in Australia, and like most tennis fans, will want the Australian Open to make headlines on the courts and not in the courts. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Edmonton's Walter Dale Bridge. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.